The one, the only Keith Smith. Keith, I know you are a busy man. Spotrac, the NBA front office show. I just saw, Keith, that the NBA front office show got picked up. Was it by NBA TV? Congrats to you and your partner, and thanks so much for joining us.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we're really excited about partnering with the league to help get our content out there to more people, and I appreciate you having me today.
Let's get right on into it, Keith. I was telling everyone before the break that when I have questions about something that I might blurt out on the air, I'll text you to confirm. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the Keegan Murray injury and how that could alter the extension talks and what you thought was going to happen prior to the injury. Maybe it doesn't change anything at all. I know you spoke with somebody within the front office after Summer League, that article that you put out, and we've gone over it time and time again. How do you see things going with Keegan as far as the extension goes now that he is injured? Could the Kings still offer him that extension, or are they going to see what he does in a contract year and let him hit restricted free agency?
Yeah, the injury itself is just a bummer, right? Like, he's just such a, fun young player who looked, so promising. His first couple of years had a little bit of a slump last year. I think it was tough on him to be in a role where he was regularly the fourth or fifth option on the floor on a team with a lot of other guys who need the ball in their hands to do stuff. So as far as things go extension-wise, the injury, there's no rules impact on that. The Kings can still do whatever they want to do as far as an extension goes. I would certainly hope that this injury, which, it does stink, it's going to cost them a month or so of the season, but this is not a, career-altering kind of injury or anything like that. So hopefully that has little to no impact on where they're at extension-wise. And then that really comes down to what can the two sides agree on. I think for Keegan Murray's side, it's not super helpful that Jabari Smith Jr., who was picked a couple picks ahead, we got took a kind of more team-friendly-ish deal in his deal with the Rockets, because now the Kings can go back and say, hey, that kind of set the market for guys who are good players, but they're a little bit lower on the pecking order and those kind of things. But I think something that comes in around $25 million or so a year feels really, really fair to me for both sides, and I would hope they get something done, because what you don't want to have happen to your friends down the road there in Golden State, where all of a sudden a guy hits restricted free agency and that becomes a whole thing. And next year, there's going to be teams with cap space that might be actually willing to go out there and chase some restricted free agents, so that could make things tough on the Kings.
Talking to Keith Smith of Spotrac and the NBA front office show, from one possible restricted free agent to one possible unrestricted free agent. Keith, a lot of fans were in an uproar when the Kings picked up Keon Ellis's option. I've talked to a couple people about this, and the initial thought was that it's a fairly safe bet, risking unrestricted free agency, and a lot of people think that they can come to an agreement. I believe that's in February. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Keith, on that with Keon Ellis. But do you think the Kings made this decision thinking, look, we just don't see a team completely pricing us out of Keon, and do you think that was a smart decision?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at this. One is I think they feel like, hey, we're in a spot where not over the luxury tax, but dancing kind of close to it. And if they had said, all right, we're going to decline the option, we'll sign him to his new contract now, that might have been the difference between being a tax team and not with Keon Ellis. So I think they wanted to avoid that if they could. So why not keep him on the really low number for this year? Because I think they are probably feeling like, yeah, no one's going to be jumping in there to try to give a big offer to Keon Ellis. But here's the thing. When he's unrestricted, it doesn't need to be a big offer. And sometimes we see guys, let's say the Kings are offering X. Another team may say, hey, we can only offer Y, but what we can also offer is 25, 30 minutes a night, X amount of shots, and those kind of things. And that's where it can become really tricky. It's not always just about being able to offer the most money. Sometimes it's that role for guys that becomes a big thing. So all that said, they have, you said it's in February when they can officially offer him an extension, because it's a 2-year anniversary of when he signed his current deal. And that's I think where this could go, I think there's a chance at that point the Kings and Keon Ellis look around and say, all right, hey, let's try to get something done. And for the Kings, you've got a few months to kind of see, all right, what does it look like with this group we have together with Keon in the mix?
Talking to Keith Smith of Spotrac and the NBA Front Office Show. Keith, this person is very polarizing. Maybe not as much lately because the Kings haven't been in the forefront like they were a couple years ago, but Domantas Sabonis. Early on, Domantas Sabonis, I guess around this time last season, there were conversation. Well, that was about De'Aaron Fox, but once De'Aaron Fox was traded, Sam Amick, The Athletic, came out, and you have Domantas Sabonis who may be assessing things. We heard nothing over the summer. We know that he likes Doug Christie. We know that he feels, or it seems like he's pretty happy right now. If this thing goes south, and if you've seen the first 20 games for the Kings, with 3 games against the Thunder, 3 games against the Nuggets, it very may well go south like that. Give us your take on Domantas Sabonis's value if he were to want to ask out, or just if the Kings decided, hey, let's just hit the eject button and move on.
Yeah, I think it's got to take the right kind of team for Sabonis. It's got to be a team that can either play him at the 4 and get away with it, or a team that has some form of really good perimeter defense with maybe a shot blocking 4 that can play him at the 5, because I think we have enough evidence now, and I say this as someone who really likes Domantas Sabonis, that he's just never going to be an anchor big on a really great defensive team. It's just not who he is. It's not what he does. I do think we spend far too much time fretting over, he's not a great rim protector, he's not this and that, and we miss that, this guy might be, one of the top 2-3 most versatile centers in the league. There's Nikola Jokic and then kind of that next group of guys, and Sabonis is right there. He's a guy who can, he might be one of, if not the best rebounders in the NBA. He's a pretty solid scorer. He started to take more jump shots again over the last year plus. And then he's a really good passer. So if you can fit him in but here's the challenge. When a guy makes $40+ million a year, teams aren't necessarily looking to fit them in. They're looking to say, all right, we can just, you're our guy. Everything's going to orbit around you. So really take the right kind of team. I think they'd find a trade for sure, because there are always enough teams that need offensive bigs. But it's got to be the right team that's going to give the Kings kind of a pretty penny in a trade for him.
And that's part of the conversation too, Keith, as you alluded to with finding Domantas Sabonis. Who do you think has the most value on the Kings now? I would say the short list is probably Sabonis, Keegan, and Keon. I think those are the top 3, but who do you think has the most trade value right now on the Kings?
Yeah, I don't want to get too sideways with a guy like Malik Monk. I think there was a lot of, the Warriors didn't want him, so, is he even good? And I think the answer is yes, he's very good. And, and I think if you're the kind of team who's both team and salary structure can support him coming in and being your 6th man, there's nothing wrong with that. I think people have turned this, he's the 6th man thing into being a bad thing. And last I checked, Jamal Crawford and Lou Williams had 20-year careers being really good, valuable 6 men. And that's where I think you could, see Malik Monk headed, where on a really good team, he's somebody, could come in and swing games for you off the bench. So I think he's got pretty good value. Contract is, perfectly fine for him. I think there's a world where Zach LaVine, especially if a team was convinced that, all right, he's going to opt out next year, and then we can get something done maybe at a lower number with more years added on. I think there's a world where he has some value as well. But that kind of, we're kind of dancing around the issue there of there's not a ton of guys that people are going to be jumping at. Like if Keegan Murray was available, the other 29 teams would all make a call.
Yeah.
Of course, it would be like, yeah, let's get on that. So I think he's got the most value simply because of where he's at career and contract-wise. But, yeah, it's a roster that's it's a little messy as far as value goes for all their tradable guys.
Keith Smith of Spotrac and the NBA Front Office Show. Keith, can you give us a little bit of clarity? I don't know if that's the best term. When it comes to DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan, Scott Perry, they're saying I guess they're not straight up saying that they decided not to move him, but another guy where, Keith, I was in his last post-game presser, and I told him this during our media day. I did not see it happening the way it happened. They're saying that they want all the vets that they can, which is why they're interested in Westbrook. Not sure how much of it is that versus what the market was or wasn't for DeMar DeRozan. Now, next season, he does have a contract that is not guaranteed. You have to have him after that January date. How do you think this goes for DeMar DeRozan with this non-guaranteed contract next season? Will he be more desirable to teams throughout the course of the season? How do you think this thing goes for DeMar DeRozan, future Hall of Famer, who's been around the block for a while here?
Yeah, it certainly could be a guy who could all of a sudden be like, hey, he's in trade talks, because we kind of know what DeMar DeRozan is, right? Pretty good playmaker for a wing, pretty good scorer still. Not exactly what teams want in scorers right now, because it's still a lot of that mid-range game. But if you're a team that is trying to make a playoff push and you're trying to make a real run, his contract is pretty acquirable because it's not $40-50 million. Once you get under 30, most teams in the league can put something together to make something like that happen. And I think what we could very easily see is if the Kings are in a position where, all right, our season's not going the way we want, we're going to start moving some guys, and we get around that trade deadline, you could have a team that says, man, we really need we need some scoring punch. And I think at this point, DeMar DeRozan is at the point in his career, too, where it might even be, hey, you willing to, we've got a chance to make a finals run. You want to come off the bench for us? We're still going to get you 25-plus minutes a night, but come off the bench, be a scorer, do your thing that way. And that could be where that flips. And that also has the value of, I call contracts like his pseudo-expiring contracts, because they're not really, but there's just not a lot left on that deal that's guaranteed beyond this year. So that's a position where that may have value to an acquiring team as well.
Keith Smith of Spotrac and the NBA Front Office Show. Keith, just a couple more for you. We ask everyone this. What would you do if you woke up today and you were Scott Perry? How would you go about this season?
Yeah, I think at this point you've got to kind of see what you have. It's not that you're locked in fully, but it's rare that teams are making major trades in October, November, even the beginning part of December. It's usually once we get into late December, and then the calendar flips and we're getting towards the trade deadline. So I would see, all right, let's see what we have. I would certainly, without Keegan Murray, I'd be working with the coaching staff and saying, all right, are we going to go super small? Like, let's just go small. Let's lean heavily into the offense. I struggle to see how they put together anything resembling a competitive defensive group out of the roster pieces that are there. So I would lean very heavily into the offense, try and outscore a bunch of outscore teams by turning games into shootouts, play very fast, get the ball up and down the floor because it is a pretty good rebounding group. And then when Keegan Murray gets back, you kind of evaluate and go forward from there. I would be trying to get an extension done with Keegan Murray as best I can. And then if we hit, January and it's, all right, things didn't really go the way we want, at that point I'd be like, hey, if you're not a really young guy on this team on a really good value contract, we're open. We're going to start talking, trades and see where this goes. And that includes, Sabonis, Levine, Monk, Schroeder, like the whole crew of them.
Last one for you, Keith Smith of Spotrac. What's your best bet on how this season goes? Do you think that's how that ends? I know they're projected to win 34 and a half games, which would have them outside of even the play-in. So you got to figure they would not be on a good track before the trade deadline. Do you think this thing does get blown up? How many of these guys do you think make it to the end of the season? What's your best bet on how this season goes for the Kings?
Yeah, I think there's a world where the Kings are competitive in the West. The problem is being competitive in the West means you're probably either out in the play-in tournament or you don't even make it. I mean, as we sit here today, a week from the season starting, Utah is really the only team in the West that I think you can confidently point to and say, yeah, they're not really trying to win as many games as possible. New Orleans is going to be trying to win. Where we know that Portland is ramping up to try to win. San Antonio trying to take steps forward. And those were some of the teams that were down and out of the playoff picture last year. And that's the challenge, I think, for the Kings is they're not in those top couple of tiers of teams, but they could be right in that next group. But the problem in the West is that next group is like 8 teams.
Right.
It's not like if they were in the East, I'd say, yeah, they could be a playoff team. Why not? It's they could certainly work their way in there, and that's the issue. And I think no matter what they do, you need to be willing to pivot very quickly if you're Sacramento into saying, all right, it's not our year. Let's go now on moving guys. Because if you wait too long, sometimes the market's already been set or sometimes the market's already moved. And then you're just kind of standing around on trade deadline day with, man, we'd like to move players X, Y, and Z, but the homes we could have sent them to already got established. So if you're not good, you got to be willing to start thinking about it right around the beginning of January instead of waiting until we get into trade deadline week.
My first thought is that Scott Perry will be on top of it, Keith, but we'll have to wait and see. Or maybe we won't wait and see because the Kings will be in the playoffs. You just never know. But what we do know is that you always come correct, Keith. We appreciate you taking the time. Keith Smith of Spotrac, the NBA front office show, which is now partnered with the NBA itself. So congrats again to you, Keith. We can't wait to have you on the show again. Take care, and we will talk to you soon.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
That was